welcome to another episode of Adventures in Contracting. I am Leona Charles, CEO and President of SBC Business Consulting, where we do all things government contracts. And today we're going to look at an award for the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability contract, also known as JWCC. It is the successor to the mess that was JEDI. And there have been some awards on it, but I really want to talk about and kind of go over the GovCon aspect of the way it was awarded, the vehicle that was used, and then getting towards the competition and what we have a good mix, which I think, for one, is a pretty decent mix of large business and small business. So to begin with, to just go back a little bit in the background of JEDI, it was a big mess. They wanted to do just kind of one single award, and the GovCon community, including myself, was very loud about how, just from a national security perspective, that was just very risky. Also, it just eliminated competition for any small business if you used one provider, and they were leaning towards Amazon at that point. And it was just it was a big mess. So it looks like, and I'm happy to say, that the contracting representatives within this award have learned a lot from the mess that was JEDI. They really did listen to the input of the GovCon industry, and they really did take a good look at what the small business community had to say and what they were thinking about how this would be implemented. And they did listen to kind of our very real practical concerns about how a single provider would be able to do this. Of course, now what helped spur that on was some of the issues that came out in terms of cybersecurity and how bringing all of the information into one platform was so risky, and what that looks like when that platform is breached. So that also helped kind of inform that decision. So what I want to talk about is the vehicle that they use. So they used a hybrid IDIQ and a firm fixed price time and materials. So an IDIQ is indefinite delivery, indefinite quality, which means that the government knows they're going to buy something, but the scope is so broad that they have no way of knowing specifically how many units they're going to need and how often they're going to use those units. So the IDIQ gives the government the flexibility to come up with that number when they're in the project already going and they understand what's happening. A firm fixed price time and materials is basically, you quote the government something, like, say for this particular contract, say one of the vendors will quote the government a couple of hours, say 2,000 hours across the agency at $150 an hour to install the software. So at that point, the government will, when it's awarded, will do a CLIN for $300,000. And a CLIN is a contract line item number. And what that CLIN will say is, okay, great, we've accepted this vendor's quote. This particular part of the contract, this individual line item, which contains an award amount, will not exceed $300,000. So for them to bill the government over $300,000, they will have to go back to the contracting officer, submit an equitable adjustment request, and all of the material necessary to justify why they need more money. So contractors hate to do that. CEOs probably hate to read them even more. So we try not to do that, because as a good rule of business is you should be able to adequately forecast what that is going to cost you and how much of your resources it's going to take. Okay, so moving on. What I do like in this is that there were, I think it was 4 total small businesses in this, which is really good. Now, of course, there were the usual players in the large businesses awarded to this, Amazon, uh, General Dynamics, GIT, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Oracle. So all of the larger players that you would expect to see on a contract this size. It is a $9 million or a $9 billion ceiling, if I'm reading this right. Let me double check. $9 billion, $9 billion ceiling. 9 million does sound a little too cheap for that. But $9 billion ceiling, they've awarded. So the small businesses they've awarded, I think that they deserve a shout out. Aminki LLC, uh, Echelon Accelerate Joint Venture, and Recovery Point VARCom Solutions, Precision Management Solutions, and JEA Holdings LLC were the small businesses that were awarded a task order on this as well. So I want to talk about the vehicle that was used to get this. So we talked about the type of contract, which is the hybrid IDIQ and firm fixed price, but the actual vehicle that they used was other than full and open competition. And what that means basically is a sole source to particular companies that the government feels like they are able to do this better than anyone else. So there are a couple of restrictions. As a rule, you don't see CEOs immediately jump to sole source because there's a ton of justifications that have to go into it. There are a ton of requirements to get this done, and there's some background research that has to show that the government has tried full and open, and that did not give them the caliber or the amount of vendors that would need to submit in order for this to be judged or to be deemed a competitive solicitation. So, other than full and open is FAR 6.3, and 6.301 subpart C tells you what is not justified. And basically what's not justified is what you've heard me say before, a lack of acquisition planning and concerns about the availability of a funding source or the expiration of a funding source is not justifiable to put something into an other than full and open category. So you've heard me say time and time again, the FAR does not view the government's poor planning as a justification to circumvent competition, which is I think is a great thing. There are a couple of specific reasons why the government would be able to use something other than full and open, and that would be there's only one responsible source, and that's usually linked to proprietary information. So you have a vendor in, they're doing something very, very specific. They are the only vendor that provides that service or product. Then that would be justifiable because you can't just go out and buy it off the shelf. You have to buy it from that one vendor. Um, Unusual and compelling urgency. So this would be something like COVID, right? That we didn't see coming, but is kind of turned into this full-fledged situation, and it's urgent and it's compelling, people are dying. That would be a reason for the government to say, okay, yes, you don't have to do competition. This is an emergency, it needs to happen, there are lives at stake or there's national security at stake, something like that. Industrial mobilization is another reason, and an international agreement. So where if this is a situation where the DoD would have had an agreement with, say, the United Kingdom or with Canada, something that took them outside of the U.S. and they had to do it that way, then that would be a justification for them doing other than full and open. And the last one would be that it's authorized or it's required by statute. So you will have some areas that the government says, it's just too risky to go to commercial. You have to do it this way. You have to do it with this vendor. And at that point, the CEO's hands are tied because there is a literal law telling him this is him or her, this is the way that you have to do it. So I've kind of combed through the justifications, and the CEO seems to have done a pretty thorough job. I didn't really find any gaps in this justification that I would kind of say, that's a little bit suspicious. They kind of went through all of it. They went through previous contract awards, and they found that previous contract awards would not encompass all of the things that were needed in this particular solicitation. They went through and they looked at the vendors. They didn't find that any vendors would be able to do it. What they harped on a lot, which I think was really smart actually, is they harped on how this particular solicitation included varying tiers of security and varying tiers of classification and impact levels. So that was really smart because what that enabled the CEO to do is say, because this one contract encompasses all of these different areas, there's no way that we could have just used a previous contractor to do this or use a previous contract vehicle to do this, because there are too many moving parts and there are too many levels to all of the different moving parts. So we had to do it this way. So that was actually pretty smart. They talked about the lack of technology advancement currently as one of the reasons. They went on to talk about the open source research that they did. The CEO talked about the required sources. They went through the federal supply schedule. They reviewed. They went above and beyond, I think, because they didn't want this to come back. They didn't want it to get kicked back again. So they did a lot of research onto previous contracts and how that would work. They talked about the results of pre-solicitation notices and hearings, who responded, what kind of technical capacity they responded with. They talked about where it was lacking. They talked about they didn't have full control. And then they kind of went through individually each contract. They went through DoD contracts. They went through government-wide contracts. They went through market research and Ability One programs. So they really, mostly you'll hear me say a lot of these sole source justifications are kind of they're a little iffy at best, but this one is a really really good one. It's really thorough. They really did their research, and I really do feel like the CEO wanted to take their time to make sure that they had turned over every rock to look for what they could do. I don't know if they've done right by the solicitation. We won't know that until until a few years from now, when we look at what's been done versus what needs to be done. But on face value, this, other than full competition, seems like it was the right decision to make. They did all of the relevant research, and they also ended up increasing competition by adding 4 small businesses to the award. So that is a win to me. All of this stuff will be in the notes on the video in the comment section. So you'll be able to pull it up and have a look at it yourself and kind of see what's going on. But if you run into this, remember, anything other than full, there has to be a justification. There has to be research done. And a failure to plan and a failure to spend your money within the fiscal year is not an adequate justification for sole source. So as you're getting further in your government contract journey, and you will see sole sources a lot, and you'll see a lot of them pop up towards the end of the fiscal year. A lot of those get denied because poor planning or poor action is not a justification for sole source. And just because you know someone and they've done a good job, that's not a justification for sole source. So your emergency is not the government's fire. They will say to you, what was your acquisition planning? What did it look like? What kind of competition did you do? Did you reach out to these professional organizations? Did you reach out to these networking organizations? Did you have industry days? Did you talk to small businesses? Did you talk to large businesses? Did you expand your geographical area? So they'll ask you all of the things that constitute a good faith effort in identifying sources. And if you haven't heard that before, a good faith effort is basically the government's way of saying, did you do the best that you can in order to find people that possibly could do this, right? And the rule is they don't have to be able to do everything, but if they can do the majority of it, then you've done a good faith effort. You'll see a lot of well, not a lot of, but I have in all my years of doing this, I have seen some justifications where they say, well, this person can do everything. They could do 80%, but they couldn't do everything. And I've seen those get knocked down because they don't need to be able to do everything. But if they could do the most important areas of it and could possibly bring in partners that can then complete the rest of it, then I've seen the government say, this is really not a good faith effort. You need to go out and try again and try to find someone and give them the option to put together partnerships or joint ventures, or sub teams that can allow them to meet all of the areas of the solicitation. So I think, I've lately been on a run of giving the government kudos, which is not something usually I'm known for, but I think they did a really good job in this. I think the justification stands on its own. There was a lot of research done in this. There were a lot of stones that were turned over and looked over. There were a lot of ideals that went through, and they really took the time. They looked through past contracts. They talked to vendors. They held a lot of industry days. Considering the way that JEDI started, it is very refreshing to see it end in this way. I was one of the loud people that was not happy with the way JEDI was going, did not think it was a good ideal. did had a terrible taste in my mouth from, you know, former officials being involved in the winning team. Um, so this was really good. I really appreciated them taking this back, doing all of the work, and figuring out how to make this work. This is the way that you do a other than full and open. This is I would hold this up as a template for how you start and how you knock off all of the areas that are required and how you justify why something needs to be done this way. I think this was a really interesting thing. Just remember, failure to plan and failure to spend money is not a justification. And if you are going after an opportunity and you're seeing it likely to be pushed that way, and the rationale is, we're close to the end of fiscal year, yeah, yeah, it is getting busy. We've got to get this. We got to get this awarded. That's not a justification, and GA will not go with that either. That's explicitly against 6.301 subsection C that says no. That's not a reason to award anything other than full and open competition. So there you have it. Again, we are on all social media platforms. We're on TikTok. We are on LinkedIn. You can email me. You can go to the website, sbcconsulting.org. Ask questions. If there's something in particular that you'd like to cover or discuss, be happy to do so. But thanks. Oh, and Happy New Year.